Jonah, hey, it's a pleasure to see you and meet you for the first time. Congratulations on your book, Awestruck: How Embracing Wonder Can Make You Happier, Healthier, and More Connected. Are you feeling connected today?
I would say so, at least in a literal sense, with our technology back up and running here. Yeah, I'm really glad to connect with you. It's an honor, and thank you so much for checking out my book, and excited to talk about it today.
The honor is all mine, and I love the book, and I think we're going to learn so much from you in this conversation. So I'm really excited about it. Really looking forward to it. Just for the listeners and viewers, you're based, I think, in the Bay Area in Northern California.
Yeah, I'm just a little north of San Francisco, which is kind of the landmark people are most familiar with out here. But I'm from the East Coast originally, so from New York City, from Brooklyn. But I was one of those people that came out to California thinking they would just come out here for a couple of years, and then next thing you know, decades go by and haven't made it out since. So I'm one of those cliches at this point, I guess. But yeah.
Well, a lot of places for awe in California, right?
Absolutely. I think if you are especially somebody who finds that sense of wonder in nature in particular, there's so many places in the world, of course, but this is definitely one of those for me that I feel incredibly fortunate to be out here for that reason, among many.
And you've got, what is it, the redwood trees, right? That are, I guess, I don't know.
Absolutely.
Some of them are. I don't know what's the oldest one supposedly.
They can, in some cases, live over 2,000 years. So when you're around these trees, the biggest living thing on Earth, 380 feet in some cases. It's not only the scale, but I think it's that timelessness too that always gets me. Where
Wow.
you're around such beauty, and then you try to wrap your head around what was happening in the world 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, when this tree was just beginning to sprout. It's pretty mind blowing to be around for sure.
It's insane. Insane. Wow. Yeah, really beautiful. What are your favorite spots to visit nature-wise
Yeah, well,
in that area?
I am the two types of again it's interesting for someone who grew up in around a lot of skyscrapers and big buildings and really not too much around nature. It has been coming home in some way, whatever in whatever deep eternal part of me, it just feels like this is what I'm supposed to be, and I'm someone that just gets a huge amount of wonder. I think for me, the redwoods actually are. So it's interesting you brought that up. That's one of the places that really get me when it comes to nature. But so many beautiful coastlines and forests and mountains and vistas that there's really no shortage. California, you've got all of that. You've got the desert. It's really like an entire country packed into one state when it comes to its outdoors for sure.
It's true.
Yeah.
You can surf and ski on the same day in California,
Yes,
right?
if you're very ambitious. I've never done that, but
Yes, yes. Not that easy.
but that
But it's doable. But yes, that's just not that easy. But yeah, that's cool. So it's interesting, right? There's so much beauty, so much, I guess, so much nature, so lots of types of beauty around us. Uh, but we forget, we take it for granted. I mean, that's part of the book, is that we don't
mm-hmm.
feel as much awe as our ancestors used to, right? I think you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in the book that the average person uh, gets into a state of awe, which actually you should probably explain what that is,
Mm-hmm.
but about 2 to 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so first of all, what is awe, and second, why is it that we have less of that than our ancestors?
Yeah, great question. So I think the really shorthand way that I always like to explain it, that I think people get, is it's really those moments in life that make us go wow. It's the moments of life that give us goosebumps and chills. I think if you take it a step further, it's when we experience something that's bigger than ourselves, and that also challenges what we thought we knew about the world. So there's always this element of scale to it, but this could be in both the physical realm or the idea realm. So vastness can come in many forms. And then that second layer is there's an element of surprise, of uplift, of there's something that is unexpected in these moments of true wonder that opens our eyes, opens our heart to being part of something that's bigger than just us in those moments. In terms of why we experience less of it. I think there are some people that probably we all know that still experience quite a bit of it. But for the average person, I mean, if you think about how much of our lives we spend, even pre-COVID, surrounded by four walls, staring at a computer screen, not connecting to the world around us. And, if you think about for 99 plus percentile of our existence as Homo sapiens, just how different of a day-to-day life that is and how disconnected we are from so many parts of the world and parts of the human experience that give us those chills and those goosebumps and those feelings of wow. It's no wonder that we're getting less of it, which is a shame because as I'm sure we'll get into, there's one of the incredible things that I've learned the last few years in researching and writing this book is these moments aren't just, like the cherry on top of a good life sundae. They really are incredibly important and they change us head to toe, inside and out.
Now, you talk about in the book how experiencing awe can make us more generous, and they can strengthen social bonds, and they make us more curious as well. So there's a lot of elements there. They're both good for society, and also you talk about from a mental health perspective how good they are for ourselves as well, our mental states. And it's interesting, I have to say, since COVID, I've been going out a lot less. It's true. I do spend a lot more time indoors, and
many of us have.
and I think, yes, that's right. So, first of all, was there a tip you can give for people these days to have more awe? Obviously, going outdoors. I mean, I've heard one thing that I heard just in terms of the fact that we don't commute anymore when we're working from home was that it might be a good idea to go out for a walk before you start working, and at the end of your workday, go out for another walk. Have a pretend commute.
I love that,
for example. But anyway, getting it. Sorry.
And not only did that give us a little awe, maybe, but it's good for our health and all. I might steal that idea, but it's been so challenging for people around this. But I would say, one of the messages of my book is that we can certainly experience this going to those really hard to reach, time consuming, but incredibly beautiful places in the world, the Grand Canyon, Stonehenge, whatever it is. But really, it's just as, or I would say even more important, to find it in the small stuff, to find these experiences in every day and to really change the way that we engage in the world. And just a simple thing that any of us can do right here is, for listeners, for viewers, even if you were to just simply look around whatever room you find yourself right in and just make note of how many things just in your field of vision, just in this space alone, would be absolutely mind-blowing to somebody 50 years ago or 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago. I mean, we're actually surrounded by wondrous things 24/7. We just don't really pay the time to notice them so often. So we can experience, during a time like this and in the small parts of our day. But even if we were to go outside and just notice changing colors of the leaves or the way that the light hits, at a particular sunrise or sunset, or even better yet, if we just imagine in our mind's eye, past experiences that have filled us with this feeling of wonder and awe, that gives us many of the same benefits. So there's a lot of ways to be creative. And, I think that in some ways, the biggest take home for me in learning about this is, the big stuff is great, but it's the small stuff that really creates those building blocks for change and for, meaningful progress over time.
Cool, I love it. Actually, I had already a few thoughts. I don't know if I'll be able to remember all of them in response to that. You do mention in the book getting a digital frame and putting photos of experiences of awe that you've had, and or just things that inspire you. So I actually, because of that, I have a digital photo frame, and I just added a photo of like the blue Earth photo just to see. So occasionally I'll see Earth from outer space, and that's inspiring.
Absolutely.
So, I love that, by the way. I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely. And, we're so conditioned to just turn the page on things. I think that, I think something like that or whatever mechanism, listeners or viewers choose to find ways to relive and to re-engage with experiences we've already had. So sometimes it's about going out and finding these moments, but just as often it's about finding ways to relive them. Our brain has this negativity bias, and it's so easy for us to just get fixated on the stressful, difficult parts of our day and lives that finding those reminders, those cues for beauty, for wonder, for awe, for gratitude, I think is an incredibly important skill, and I'm glad that you're taking up on it as well. I certainly have too.
Yeah, no, it's great. So actually, and I'm familiar with this idea of a negativity
Mm-hmm.
bias that, for example, one criticism needs like, I don't know, I think they say four
Uh-huh.
compliments or something to counteract it. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
exactly what it is, but the point is we take criticism a lot more
yeah.
seriously and are looking, we're primed to look for threats in order to survive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's and by the way, it's certainly not an insult for listeners or for I think we need this to survive. If and essentially the idea is that our brain is really primed to notice the negative and to fixate on threats and to be hyper attuned to negative cues in our environment, which makes sense when you remember that most of our existence as humans, the goal of life was not to be happy. The goal of life was to survive. And so this negativity, but we're walking around with essentially the same machinery in our brains as we were, needing to survive saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and all the rest. But in many of our day-to-day lives today, what that means is we end up stressing about bills and work and emails that we forgot to respond to, and things that are not really life and death threats, but can often feel that same sort of fight or flight reaction. So it does take, in some estimates, 3-4 positive mental experiences to counteract a single negative one, because we just tend to really jump to the negative so easily. So for that reason, whether it's doing things like, practicing mindfulness and just learning to notice the full picture, whether it's creating a gratitude journal, whether it's having these reminders and cues of experiences that filled us with wonder, what we want to do is find different ways in our day-to-day lives to swing that pendulum a little bit more back to the middle. Because otherwise, the image I always get is you've got like a seesaw or a scale with two sides, and every time something lousy happens, we add 3 pounds to one side. Every time something good happens, we add a 1 pound weight to this side. It's very difficult to keep up after a while. So we have to find ways to add more of those 1 pound weights.
I love that. And a gratitude journal obviously is a great thing. And because from what I understand, often in our dreams, we tend to have some often more negative dreams than positive
Mhm.
dreams. So writing things that you're grateful for before going to sleep
Mhm.
supposedly can prime you for better sleep as
Yeah,
well.
that has been
I
shown.
understand. But also in terms of gratitude, in terms of gratitude, you mention in the book a gratitude jar,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I wasn't familiar with. Could you explain to people what a gratitude
Yeah,
jar is?
this is a great one that I think folks, listeners who have kids, who have families, it's a wonderful one to do as a family. But you can certainly do it by yourself, with it, however you want. And essentially, what you would do is each day just notice one thing that went well or one thing that you're grateful for. Write it on a little piece of paper. You could do it digitally, of course, too, but you put it in a jar. I think the jar, the physical way, actually works nicer in this case. And then at the end of a designated time, whether it's at the end of each week, everyone in the family has put in their 7 days of good things in the jar, and then we dump it out and take a look, or at the end of each month, or if you want to be have a great delayed gratification, do it at the end of the year, and just see the incredible bounty of goodness. And it does a few things. One, it fills us with wonder to remind ourselves of how much good exists in our lives, even amidst the stress and the worries and the difficulties. But second, it's this incredible way to re-remind ourselves of all of these. I mean, 90% of them we will have forgotten by the end of that time period. But when we stop and pause and remember, it's incredible. So that's a great one with kids, with families to come together and to share these kinds of experiences too.
Absolutely, I love that. And this idea, it's interesting. You talk about reliving moments of awe. That obviously is reliving things you're grateful
Mm-hmm.
for, uh, and this notion that by reliving something, it's almost as though you're experiencing it again. I mean, there are even studies that for athletes, if they visualize, I don't know, shooting I don't know, a 3-pointer to a
Mm-hmm.
basketball hoop, or practicing their serve, that actually they will perform better later.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost, when your mind imagines something, it's almost like you're there. And certainly reliving moments of awe, that's very healthy, right?
Absolutely.
Um, to
You
do.
you'll see different estimates, but it's pretty amazing. Like if you were hooked up to, let's say, functional MRI. And so in other words, looking at what's happening in your brain in real time, or you're hooked up to different electrodes, looking at, what's happening in terms of your nervous system. What various studies are showing is that around, if we just picture something in our mind, we have about 70% similar reactions inside of our nervous system and our brain as when that's really happening. So it's a very similar experience, whether it's happening right in front of us or oftentimes if we're imagining it. Now, unfortunately, that cuts both ways. When we have something stressful happen to us and we find ourselves ruminating and worrying and replaying, we are reinforcing that all through our systems the same way. But it's almost like a superpower you can use for good or not. But if we go out of our way to use that same mechanism towards remembering things that are good, towards re-experiencing moments of awe, to doing an act of kindness and then reflecting on it afterwards, you can actually get a lot more bang for your buck, so to speak, with all these types of habits for well-being.
I mean, this is interesting. This idea of reliving. We'll get to some tips because you've got so many tips of like things that can generate awe. But before we do that, you do mention in the book, and I find this really, really interesting, the statistic that about half of our waking hours, our mind is elsewhere. We're thinking about things that are not like right in front of us, the present. And so there's a tendency to kind of shift away. And mindful practice is more about being in the present, appreciating the present, not taking for granted, and not ruminating just about this bad stuff, right? So
exactly.
And if you're gonna use this power, so first of all, we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to be in the present, appreciate it, love it, live it. But now, just to kind of, I guess, maybe tease you to some extent, could you get into this hedonistic loop of memory where you just try and keep, like, can you think of awe too often? Is there such a thing? Like, like in the Matrix, there's I forget, there's some character who's happy to betray them just so he knows he can stay in some endless loop where he gets everything he wants, basically.
Yeah, well, this is a great question, and my mind goes to several places at once. I write and I present and I talk about well-being, but I think what some people don't always remember, and I think it's worth repeating, is we need all of our experiences and all of our emotions, right? And I think sometimes that false dichotomy of, well, this is a good feeling, this is a bad feeling, this is a pleasant emotion, this is a difficult one. We wouldn't want to find a way to excise any of our emotional world. We kind of need all of it, including the painful stuff, right? I mean, that gives us the full beauty of the experience of being human. A couple of points come to mind too. If you have an experience of awe, it's going to have its most powerful effect right away in the moment. And it's going to have some powerful effects the first few times you're reminiscing and savoring and replaying it. But if there's no element of sort of spacing that out, or no element of surprise, by the 900th time that I'm picturing myself in the same place, it's probably going to have a diminishing return. So we do want to have some variety too in terms of how we're doing it. And I would say, on that note of being in the present, we don't want to find ourselves constantly either being future oriented, so thinking constantly about better times are ahead and what can I look forward to, because we miss out on what's in front of us. Nor do we want to go to the other extreme and just think about reminisce over good times, but in some ways not be present to what is our current experience. So I think all of these skills come together so nicely, and I think mindfulness is crucial, and it does, it allows us to be present. It also allows us to notice more of the things that are right in our environment that are actually incredible, but that we don't take the time to really appreciate. I would say, like this morning, waking up and enjoying my morning coffee, and just watching some birds that were chirping outside, and being able to just fully feel the sensation and the texture of the blanket that I had on. All of these are actually things that I'm able to experience more of through building that muscle of the mind of being present. But the more present that we are, the more grateful we become. The more grateful we become, the more awe-inspired we become. So I often think of these two as, there's feedback loops between all of these healthy habits too.
And yeah, and we don't want to live in a matrix.
No,
We want to live in the real world and appreciate it and
that's for
enjoy it
sure.
and not take it for granted. And that makes sense. And have the full spectrum of emotions
Mhm.
that life can give us.
Absolutely.
Uh, so I love that. I mean, because you mentioned again with regards to other people defining awe, kind of back in the early days, not
Mm.
exactly awe, but things similar. Freud, I
Mm.
think it was in his text
Mhm.
Civilization and Its Discontents. He
Yes.
mentions this oceanic
Uh-huh.
feeling, and Maslow, you mentioned, talks
Mhm.
about peak experiences. What are those for the listeners? Yeah, and what does that mean? Like,
Yeah. So in an early chapter in the book, I go through sort of these the way that awe has been thought about over the years. Because even though it's a new area in the field in terms of studying it, it is not a new feeling, right? And this is something that's been part of who we are as human beings for tens of thousands of years, and it's I would say just as core to who we are as any other universal human emotion. So yeah, different. If you look back over hundreds and hundreds of years, whether it's in religious texts, whether it's in philosophical treatises, whether it's even people in mental health like Freud and Maslow and many others that talked about similar constructs, sometimes even using the same uh, word. Maslow, when he talked about peak experiences, these moments of just being fully alive and just these moments of resonance, these moments of doing something that just you know we're going to look back on in 30 years and remember. So these power, not to say all peak experiences are awe, but awe definitely would fall under that kind of umbrella. But I think these more modern.
You mentioned it also can be inspiring to watch peak performers. So if we
Yeah.
watch athletes
Mm-hmm.
doing amazing things, or circus performers, or actors
Mm-hmm.
at their best, that inspires awe as well. So
Absolutely.
experiencing peak performance obviously does, but watching that
Yeah.
can be also can electrify us in a sense.
And isn't that, I always love stepping back and realizing that, because it's amazing to me that this powerful emotion can be evoked in so many different. We can experience it from being in the redwood trees, but we can also experience it watching Michael Jordan play basketball, or listening to an inspiring leader give an impassioned speech, or watching an incredible piece of art. That there are just so many parts of our world that bring this about. um, and I think a cool thing for listeners and viewers to consider too is, we spoke earlier about some of those benefits, like awe makes us more kind to other people. It sparks compassion. It makes us more connected, so we see ourselves as part of the group. It makes us more curious, but it's also found incredible benefits for stress, for boosting our mood, for helping us feel less stretched thin for time. Even it even like lowers inflammation in our body, so our immune system even changes. There's just this to me has been one of the most mind blowing parts of learning about this. Is not only do these moments make us feel alive and make us feel good right after, but they have lasting changes in so many parts of our experience.
It's amazing. Yeah, it absolutely is amazing. So we can experience awe, you mentioned, on a daily basis if we put
Mhm.
our minds to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's
And you talk about
mm.
oh, please,
Oh,
yeah.
that I think is really in some ways the take home message that I hope everybody who reads the book or listens now takes with them is, we hear awe, and at least for me, I used to think, oh, that's what you get when you visit the Eiffel Tower, or that's what you experience when you listen to a beautiful symphony. But really, I would say, if there's the two core messages of my book would be that these moments matter, and we can find them in so many more parts of our lives than we tend to sometimes remember. But I cut you off, so sorry. You were going somewhere.
Oh, no, no, sorry. I mean, but no, just on where you're going in your train of thought. You mentioned in the book how we should use new lenses. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even just looking at our environment a different
Mm-hmm.
way. Uh, whether it's a magnifying glass where you
Mm-hmm.
start to look at the beauty of, like, the microscopic world, or with a microscope,
Yeah.
obviously, uh, but certainly with telescopes,
Mm-hmm.
binoculars, or obviously this might involve travel, but
Mm-hmm.
snorkeling as well. Different lenses
Yeah.
to experience and see the world, right?
100%.
That's so finding ways to switch our point of view. Um,
Telescope was
and you
actually my
mentioned a lot of things
pandemic.
where
That was my
obviously.
Getting a telescope, funny you should mention, was actually
Really?
my pandemic hobby. So during that long stretch when we just couldn't do anything, I would sometimes take my telescope out and go to a really dark place and just look out at what is there. And for me, that's another one of those moments of just reminding us of our smallness, and yet, not in a negative light though. It's like we're small, yet how amazing we get to have this moment right
Yeah,
now. Mm-hmm.
it is. Yeah, the vastness of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's awesome. So, what type of stuff were you looking at with your telescope?
Oh, you can actually see on a dark enough night. I mean, you can see other galaxies, and you can certainly get great views of other planets,
Wow,
depending on the time of year. So, um,
yeah.
different star clusters. So you can really see quite a bit. I can't quite get to some of the, as they call, deep sky objects, like different nebulas, and I think I need to get a little more powerful lenses.
Mm,
But you could see some amazing things, and you start to wrap your head around the light that I'm seeing from that is this many years old, and you're really looking into the
mm,
past, which is just an
that's
incredible
right.
feeling, and the scale of it all is just
It could
mind
be
blowing.
thousands, if not millions of light years
Yeah,
to get to us, right?
it's hard to
From
believe.
certain places. It's
Hmm.
crazy. And totally different by the time it gets to us. That is that is crazy. So you talk about all these also interesting things. Obviously, everybody knows that a sunset is inspiring, and
Hmm.
obviously that happens all the time. But even if you can't see a sunset, just taking time to look out at the light that
Hmm.
has it changes every day during sunset is usually quite mesmerizing if we do
Absolutely.
that. And of course, you mentioned things like clouds, which are beautiful to
Hmm.
watch. It's something I've been trying to do a bit more. And I love looking at clouds. You
Hmm.
talk about rainbows, which are not always that easy to
No.
catch, but uh, they're, they're quite awe inspiring. And you even talk about the mythology of rainbows. Do you remember? Kind of you talked about. I think it was the goddess Iris. I think it
Hmm. Yeah,
was, or
different
is
ways
that
that.
right?
Yes, I believe that was right. I the thing about when you write a book is by the time we're having this conversation, it was words that I wrote. Speaking of the past, like the stars, not quite as old as the stars, but at least a couple to 3 years. But I believe that's correct. But yeah, I write about because oftentimes with awe, there's different layers through which we can experience it. There's the like something like the physical beauty of a rainbow and just the incredible way that appears to our eyes. But I think you can even dig a little deeper and think about with a lot of parts of our natural world, what has this meant to different peoples and cultures over the course of history, and how have people made sense of this and told stories and legends, and how many thousands of years of people before me were looking at this star and describing it as who knows what. um, so you just have this sense of connection in that way that I think is really cool, beyond just the, oh, that's a beautiful rainbow, how neat. So I get into a little bit of that with some of those sections too. But yes, rainbows may be a little harder to catch than a sunset. Some of these are rare birds.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, absolutely, that's great. Because you do mention obviously, in addition to physical things that we see, you talk about connection, love.
Mm-hmm.
How does love give us awe? Maybe you
Yeah.
can explain.
So for that in the book, the first part, I of course spend a little bit more time on some of the science and the recent research and how do these experiences benefit us. But I also wanted this to be, many books in the psychology world are a little more descriptive, and I wanted it to really be both a descriptive book, but also somewhat of a prescriptive book to really give people a wide menu of ideas, some of which are going to hit home, and some of them frankly won't, and that's okay. What inspires a feeling of awe in one person might give someone else a shrug. I remember I had a friend out. We went to Muir Woods, which is those beautiful redwoods in Northern California. This was a friend from New York, and he was going to come out. He was in the area, and I said, "Hey, I want to take my buddy to this very like quintessential California experience. Let me take him to Muir Woods." So we get there. We're walking around, and for me, it's like this cathedral. These 2,000-year-old trees, and they're 350 feet tall. And mind blowing. And after about 15 minutes, he turns to me. He's like, "So, is there anything else to see here besides trees? How long before we go grab that bite of food?" I'm like, "Ah." But it's going to give him not what it gives
Ouch.
me necessarily. So I wanted to give about 65 or so different ideas in the book, of how we might experience this. And, so I go over about these 10 pathways to awe. Nature is one of them, whether that's through, sunsets, whether that's through rainbows, mountains, forest bathing, and others.
Sorry to interject. You're going to need after this to explain what forest bathing is to some people.
Oh, sure, of course.
Well, because not everybody knows what that means.
That
We'll come
term,
back to that. We'll come back
yes,
to
good
that.
to
But
put a pin in that, because if that's not a term people know, it's going to. First, perfect. But there's also these other parts of life, like we talked about, feeling inspired by people, whether that's people that are fighting to make the world a better place, or the frontline healthcare workers keeping us safe during COVID, or performers or athletes or whatever. So that's like a whole other domain. And then in the interpersonal realm, I talk about sometimes the awe that we feel, that we get, just through like a moment of true connection, right, with another human being, or a moment of true love, where it just hits you in whatever form that takes. And just when we pause and we step back and we think of what an incredible human experience that is, like what a rare gift in that sense, and something that's been, for hundreds, thousands of years, really, talked about, from the greatest philosophers to poets and sonnets. And, to just have those moments where we step back and think, this is really magical. This is really special. This is something I can't even put to words, and yet is just such an incredible part of this journey called life. So just, little prompts like that throughout that chapter on connection. Now, forest bathing. So,
what?
yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, I know have a lot of. So if I leave out anything in the definition, but it's a term that comes over from Japan, called Shinrin-yoku. And this was something that I took a while to wrap my head around, because first off, you're not bathing in the forest. That's one thing we want to be clear. So it's not like you go in and you find a spring and you're bathing yourself with soap and all that. It really, to my way of thinking, the best way to think about it is it's about just simply being. Simply connecting to that space. So, I'm a big hiker, but it's less about going from point A to point B, and it's really more just about, using our senses and, noticing just the textures, the colors, feeling the ground beneath you, putting your hands on the tree, literally becoming a tree hugger, as it were, smelling the scents that are in the air. And really just slowing everything down and just being. And while that can sound on the surface simple, it actually goes much deeper than that. And there's entire, organizations devoted to this and to training people, which I know that you are familiar with as well. But I wanted to give a chapter to really recognize in that this is a way that we can connect with nature. That's not just about getting to the top of the mountain, but actually, what is it like to just simply connect with the natural world in this way.
Yeah. So mindfulness, trying to feel awe. And also, hugging trees, touching trees. People also talk about how it grounds us, literally, like, electrical grounding.
Yeah.
Just even touching the earth is supposed to be good for ourselves, right? Very healthy.
Absolutely.
So, or even walking barefoot occasionally, right? Like
yes.
In nature.
Love doing that. Just watch your step.
That's super. Yes, absolutely. But yeah, you mentioned your friend who didn't enjoy, being out there as much as you did, and I wonder to some extent, how important is it to share an experience of awe? Because you can experience it on your own, going out somewhere, or with someone else. What is sharing awe like? How does that affect things?
Yeah, great question. Both are good. So, I think if we end up feeling more, experiencing awe in a more solitary moment, that's wonderful for us too. And I think one of the really neat findings is that actually even those solo experiences of awe still help us feel closer to other people. So it's still a very connecting emotion, even if it's alone. But, like with many emotional experiences, if we have another person with us, especially somebody that we care about, and we can share that moment, it does a couple of things. Number one, it helps us feel closer to that person, which is a nice bonus. And it also gives us somebody to relive and replay and to sort of reminisce and to, anchor that experience and draw it out. So you not only have that intensity of the moment, but it gives you something to, someone to help you hold on to those moments as well. So I would say in many cases, when we share these moments of wonder, it can make them that much more powerful and connecting.
Both are good, but there can be a bonus
Yeah,
to sharing awe.
absolutely. Even before COVID, we lived in, by some measures, the loneliest time in human history. Many of us, living in the United States where I am, and
Mm.
elsewhere. And that was even before we were then, you know, taken apart even more from many of the people that we love. So I think, the experience is the cool thing about awe. It's a timeless experience. It's but it's also something I think is especially important in our moment right now, in terms of bringing us back together, reconnecting with people that we love, increasing compassion, helping people see each other as people, and decreasing polarization. I mean, these have all been amazingly shown to be benefits of awe. So it's like this eternal, always good for us, but in some ways more urgent, I would say, right now. So that was just where my mind was going. But
Awe can also be of catastrophes,
yeah.
bad things, and not in an enjoyable sense,
Mm-hmm.
but they can make us realize, kind of, appreciate, I guess, the good times, or
Mm-hmm.
or kind of the way things are in general. You talk about for a bit about what, like, negative experiences of awe.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we think back to that definition of awe, and it's, we experience something that's bigger than ourselves, that makes us feel small and challenges what we thought we knew about ourselves or the world, you can actually see how that would apply to things that aren't just good. And some experiences that are outright, unpleasant still have that awe element. Think of things like natural disasters, or, out here in California with many of our wildfires and
Mhm.
earthquakes, and but even things like 9/11 or the Challenger explosion. That there are these parts of life that we wouldn't want to wish on anybody, but I still have that layer of awe. And, you know you don't get all the benefits from positive awe that you do you wouldn't see that in negative awe in many of the same ways, but it does two things really interestingly. I think is that it still makes us closer to other people, and it makes people kinder towards others. So it boosts compassion and connection even when it's from painful experiences. So there's still an important kind of evolutionary benefit of sorts that you might say from that.
You also mentioned music, arts, architecture, and going out, getting creative, do things on your own,
Mhm.
enjoy making stuff. Can you talk about how those things can make us feel awe, and the benefits of that?
Yeah, I think there's this really bi-directional relationship, in a sense, with creativity and the arts, and awe. If you think of, how many of these incredible works of art, we can assume, and uh, were inspired, even you might say, by moments of awe, by experience of awe that the artist had. Oftentimes, I think that's a big part of the creative process. But and then it can in turn inspire us and uplift us, and kind of show us what's possible. And so whether it's gazing at a beautiful painting, or for me, architecture can be an incredible muse for awe. That if you're just an incredible vast scale, especially historical buildings, say, that's just how did they build this 1,000 years ago? That's wild. You can have this just fill you up with a sense of wonder. But for listeners who have those creative sides themselves, I think it's a great way to play around with it too, and tap into either using moments of awe and using the creative process to reflect on that, to paint about it, to write about it, or just have these moments of like, wow, we are doing something in this moment as a human being that no other animals really do. Like this, it exists in my mind, and now I'm creating it. How cool! And it can have that layer as well, I think.
But I know you're conscious of time. Before we wrap, you briefly touch in the book, on psychedelics,
Mm.
but then you say it's out of the scope of the book. Do you want to maybe talk a
Yeah,
bit about psychedelics as
it's
well?
just a little not my expertise in a sense, other than just having a passing knowledge of the literature. But I think it's a fascinating kind of subfield that is getting a lot more research now, and a lot more. It's kind of coming out of the shadows, and people are seeing that there's just incredible psychological and health based research that we can do with it and understand it, and especially if it's done in a responsible, safe way, and in certain proper settings, that it can be life changing for so many people. But what I touch on in the book briefly is that, um, and I think it was Michael Pollan who wrote How to Change Your Mind, who once called psychedelics synthetic awe, and that always stuck with me, because when you look at what's happening in the brain and the nervous system when we experience a powerful moment of awe, it actually looks really similar in many cases in terms of different brain regions that are active versus deactivated and so forth. As what occurs during certain psychedelic states. So there's something similar happening in terms of like a dissolving of the ego, so to speak, in terms of this thinning, blurring of the lines between ourselves and the world around us and other people. That I think is going to be a really interesting area for this research to continue to explore, because I think there's a lot of overlap between those states for sure.
Help people with PTSD, things like that, and it's quite an addiction, quite effective apparently. But that's interesting. Synthetic awe. That's
I like that phrase
that
when I
term.
heard that.
So thank you for sharing it. That's cool. Any other, I guess, things? I mean, I know that you also wrote another book, which I think gives like 7 tips on how to be happy.
So my previous books are called Real Happiness and the Happiness Toolbox, and those are just a little bit more broadly focused on different ideas for well-being. So, gratitude, mindful awareness, self-compassion, optimism, forgiveness and acceptance, things like that. So that's for readers that want a little bit more of a broad stroke view on well-being and so forth. That would be a good resource. But yeah, the I keep saying new, but everything is so blurred with time. Now it's about 6 months old. The most recent book, Awestruck, if folks are looking for not only the science behind it, but suggestions on how to get more of this really important emotional experience in your life, I'd be honored for you to check that out as well. I think it's always been good, but as I mentioned a little earlier, I think we need a little bit of this more than ever in some ways.
Yeah. We are definitely, as you say, awe-deprived. We're so before the pandemic, and all the more so now. So I think your book is great, and I hope more people get to experience more experiences where they lose the ego for a little bit and feel connected to the rest of the world, the universe. So thank you so much for helping make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on. This has been. I feel like we could just keep rolling, but maybe we'll have to find a part 2 at another point in time.
Yeah.
But sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to chat with you, and hope all the listeners, are able to find a little bit more of that wonder in life in the coming days.
Thank you.